who really crashed the Silicon Valley Bank. While everyone has been explaining how and why the SVB crashed, nobody has really pointed out how founders and herd mentality played a part in it. $2 billion were withdrawn on 10th March, leading to SVB's cash crisis and eventually its crash. Let me show you how founders also had a hand in it and how this changes the ballgame for startups. Let's dig in. What happened with SVB was a classic bank run. But what is a bank run? See, take a neighborhood bank. 100 people have bank accounts in it with 1,000 rupees each in their accounts, bringing total deposits to 1 lakh rupees. Now a news floats out. The bank has made bad investment decisions and only has 10,000 rupees left in deposits. Well, naturally, it will scare you and you will ask the bank for your money back. But the other 100 people will also demand it simultaneously. Now the bank does have money to pay some people at once, but not everyone. When more than majority people ask for their deposits back, this is when a bank run happens. Take the saving and loan crisis of the 1980s in the US. People freaked out because they lost confidence in the banks and thought banks didn't have enough money to give their deposits back. And to calm them down, banks actually stashed windows with cash so people could physically see money and feel better. But this unfolded over weeks, giving regulators time to deal with it. But what happened with SVB was mind-blowing. With the power of Twitter, SVB unfolded within a day. From having $210 billion under management to $42 billion withdrawn in a single day. That's more than $1 million per second. But it's not the bank run which is the problem, but the speed at which the second largest bank run unfolded. We'll come back to this later, because it tells us a lot about herd mentality in startups and why founders should stay away from it. Let's understand a little bit about the Silicon Valley Bank first. You see, from the beginning, it had specialized in serving startups, technology companies, and media firms. It had seen its fair share of rough times like the 2008 financial crisis, but had stayed fairly strong and became the 16th biggest bank in the US. It also had nearly half of US startups as its clients. And Indian companies also had a long relationship with the SVB. For example, at least 40 Y Combinator backed Indian startups had between $250,000 to $1 million each in deposits, and over 20 of them had over $1 million each in deposits in the SVB. So if everything was hunky-dory, why a sudden bank run? For this, we need to zoom out a little back to the pandemic.
Maintaining its current interest rate target at between 0 and 0.25%, that is the lower bound.
See, immediately after the pandemic, the US central bank slashed interest rates to almost zero. They did this because they wanted to entice people to borrow money. Because the rates were so low, people would spend. In short, they wanted to boost the economy. This also meant a lot of funding flowing through VCs to startups. And SVB rode this VC boom like a champ. You see, VCs and their portfolio companies both had their bank accounts in SVB. So deposits grew from $61 billion in 2019 to $189 billion by 2021. Now, banks make money in two ways, by loaning it or investing it. At this time, startups weren't asking for loans because, remember, VC money. So SVB had a lot of spare cash. It decided to keep some of it on hand and invested the rest, putting a large share into long-dated bonds that promised good returns when interest rates were low. But things changed in 2022 and 23 as inflation surged, and the Federal Reserve of the United States raised interest from nearly 0 to a 4.5% to cool down the economy. Now when the interest rates go up, bond returns go down. So as a result, two things happened. The value of SVB's holdings of the bonds crashed because new bonds paid more interest rate, up to 4.5%, whereas SVB was raking in yields of 1 to 2%. And as interest rates rose, the gush of venture capital funding to startups also slowed down. As a result, these startups and tech companies had to withdraw more of their money from the bank to meet their payrolls and other expenses. And this is where disaster struck. But before we get into that, we've been loving your comments on our videos and I have a request to make. Please go to the comment section below and tell us about an interesting breakdown that you would love to watch. And we'll get to making it right away. Now let's get back to it. On March 8th, SVB announced that it had sold over $21 billion worth of securities, borrowed $15 billion, and would hold an emergency stock sale to raise $2.25 billion. This announcement triggered panic amongst its customers who feared that the bank was insolvent. Unfortunately for SVB, something else had happened at the same exact time. The day it announced its stock and bond sale, Silvergate, a banker to crypto firms, imploded as well. It was the exact same playbook. They committed the same mistakes as SVB. And when Silvergate collapsed, it spooked startups which banked with SVB. Word spread quickly within tech circles that trouble was brewing. Famous investors like Peter Thiel and Gary Tan and other VC firms tweeted, sent memos, had conference calls, and told their investing companies to pull out money from SVB as well. This trickle of messages turned into a flood, and thus SVB became the victim of an old-fashioned bank run. Companies became nervous about the safety of their deposits and rushed to pull their money out. And as I said, a bank which had $210 billion under management in 2023 saw $42 billion get pulled in a single day. That's more than $1 million per second. And by the close of business that day, SVB had a negative cash balance of $958 million. You see, during normal times, a bank would have enough deposits to pay back its clients, but not all at once. And this is how the SVB collapsed. They had enough assets under management, but not enough liquid cash to answer all withdrawal requests. Startups were spooked because of the $250,000 deposit insured by the government, but the FDIC did come through on 10th March, saying depositors will have full access to their money, be it secured or not secured. So that is what happened to the SVB. Now that we know what happened there still remains a deeper concern. Sure, SVB didn't have the best risk management, a responsible board and all of those things. But the larger concern is what happened with SVB today can happen with literally any company tomorrow. A mass-induced hysteria is possible for any product. And here are 4 learnings that would do founders and futures a world of good after this event. Avoid mimetics. The word mimetics comes from the word mime, basically meaning copying whatever others are doing. Think about it. Stampedes are created when people see other people running and they don't give much thought about why is that happening. We don't think of Twitter like a stadium in which you can easily be trampled, but it is not too far off. Being caught up in the process changes how we see reality, and it takes only a mere suggestion by the right person to put a panic into motion, one person at a time. In this case, it was Peter Thiel and many more men in power who later deleted their tweets. It doesn't matter whether the suggestion turns out to be true or false, or even the motivations of the person who made it. The effect is the same. Founders want to create the best outcomes for themselves, their employees, their investors, and the company. But it would do you a world of good if herd mentality is given more thought in the future. Second, we'll see funding dry up further. See, banks like SVB were actually the best friends of startups. When other banks shunned their hands from serving small startups, it was SVB who came to their rescue. SVB was the larger issuer of venture debt in the startup ecosystem. You see, many post-seed stage startups would take out loans after they raised equity. The loans enabled the companies to avoid giving up more equity while giving them a cheaper source of capital, allowing them to grow companies and continue operations. For example, take Facebook. It raised $100 million in venture debt to pay for computers and data centers. For collateral, the companies would put up their intellectual property like patents, trademarks, or other assets. And it's funding drying up and more eyeballs now on startups just on an ecosystem level. It will get tougher for startups to raise money now. So focusing on profitability and revenue growth will have to become the new norm. Third, diversification. A lot of startups will now have to have 2 banks. One top 4 bank in their country that gives them a garb of safety, and another bank like SVB that offers tailor-made solutions for startups in particular. We'll see a lot of interesting innovation in the banking for startup space, with players like Brex raising $1 billion over a weekend, or something like Razorpay in India. And fourth, more emphasis on finances. Most startups today don't look at finance as a primary vertical in the company unless there is a Series B, C round. This is when a CFO is hired, at which point the CFO's initial job is to diversify their funds out into different banks and get favorable deals from there. We'll see tons of startups now focusing on finance as a key division in their companies, and rightly so. And well, That's the story of how founders crashed a $200 billion bank by mistake.